Thanks, everybody, for joining us. I am very honored to have today for a conversation about his latest book, William Patry, known to us here at Google as Bill, who serves as a senior copyright counsel at Google, and before that has a very esteemed career as a copyright scholar, a copyright lawyer, and in fact is one of the authors of one of the leading treatises on copyright law, Patry on Copyright. So thanks very much for joining us today, Bill.
Thanks for having me, Fred. I would say I had a long and checkered career. My mother wondered if I'd ever be able to keep a job. So.
Lo and behold, it worked out in the end.
It did.
Great. So thanks to you for coming by Google to talk about your new book, How to Fix Copyright. Came out just a few months ago, right?
Yes, November.
Fantastic. And so we'll have a conversation here. I have some questions to warm Bill up with, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. I just ask you, before you ask a question, to wait for the handheld mic so that we have that on the tape. So, as I was reading your book, Bill, I couldn't help but feel as though I was reading, it was almost like a sports account. I almost felt like here was somebody who loves his hometown team of copyright, and yet is deeply unhappy with the direction the managers have been taking it. So what do you think about that? How far astray do you think things have gotten, and have you given up hope on the copyright law that you've spent your life working on?
Right, so that's a pretty good metaphor. I mean, another one would be, it's like a favorite aunt or uncle, who's always been a bit goofy, maybe a bit creative, but never as creative as they think they are. And so you have a good time, and then all of a sudden, after a while, things sort of take like a hard turn, and you're a bit surprised by that, and you try to work things out so they can get back to being the nice, goofy person they were before. But may or may not work.
So you're saying this book is like an intervention for Uncle Copyright?
Right. Right. I view myself as being within the family. I mean, I've done it for 30 years, so if I didn't enjoy it, it would be really a waste of time. But if you do care about something, then you want it to work out well. And when it's not, you can either shut up, in which case you shouldn't complain about it. But if you don't like the way it's going, then you probably should say something and try and point out ways so that your favorite aunt or uncle could be goofy again and not such a difficult, destructive person.
Well, with that, then let's start with the what you view as the afflictions of copyright, or at least the ways that copyright has gone a bit off the rails in recent years. What would you say are sort of your top three ills that you think need fixing?
Right. At least it's not the 10 plagues with Passover coming soon. So 3 plagues, only 3 plagues, 3 afflictions.
Frogs, boils, locusts, what are they?
Right, death of the firstborn, that sort of thing. So one would be probably all of the rhetoric that's used about what copyright can do, should do, is doing, and sort of the inability to get past that, the inability to really have a rational discussion about where we want copyright to be. Maybe the second affliction would be that all too many policymakers actually believe it. They actually believe all of the things that are said. And if you read some of the things that are said, copyright supposedly can do everything but cure the sick and take care of global warming. So, once something can do something like that, then everyone wants to sign on. But if it can't do those things, then people get disappointed. So it's sort of surprising that people believe it can do all of those things. And the third one might be trade, that copyright is a trade issue. So it's always been a trade issue in some ways. I mean, the United States didn't protect English works for the first 100 years because it was our national trade policy not to be able to not pay English authors. But what's happened since at least the mid-'80s was that copyright became part of trade agreements and conditioning benefits for providing adequate and effective protection to U.S. works. And it's become rigid. First of all, it's anti-democratic, as the demonstrations and protests about ACTA have pointed out. It's an anti-democratic way to make policy, to have trade officials doing it. But once you do it, then it becomes rigid, and you can't go back. unless you abrogate the trade agreement. So let's say, like in an ideal world, that policymakers were data-driven, like we are at Google, right? You figure out what it is you want to do, you've got the data to support it, and then you go and do it, and if it doesn't work, you constantly iterate and reiterate until you get it right. That's like a logical, rational way to do things. But once things become put into trade agreements, you don't have that flexibility anymore. You either have the choice of abrogating the trade agreement or not. And the not part is living with things that don't work. So I'll give you an example. This is one that Hal Varian certainly has provided a lot of good data on, which is what's the appropriate length of copyright. And back in 1998, when we extended it 20 more years, did those 20 years lead to any more works being created? I mean, that was the argument. The argument was, well, if we extend the term of copyright 20 more years, it's going to make people create things that they wouldn't create, right? That's a factual statement, and it's one that you should be able to empirically figure out. And Hal did really great work, in figuring that out. And, the answer is no. It's not going to lead to the creation of any more works at all. In hindsight, it hasn't.
Right, and it always struck me, the notion that you tell an author today that 70 years after you die, it's hard to really see that as being highly motivating in the moment, even without empirical data.
Right. So here's the fact situation. You're in 1998, you're a policymaker. The existing term of copyright is your life plus 50 more years, right? And so the argument is, no, we need to incentivize people more. If we give 20 more years to copyright, then you're going to create more works and everyone will be happy. Right? Well, that 20 more years, of course, is tacked on to the end. So we're talking about somebody, say, in 2012, sitting around saying, well, what do I do today? Do I write another book, or do I take the trash out, or find some other way to make money? So in figuring out that incentive, I think, well, all right, how long will this copyright last? Well, it'll last for my life, and I don't know how long I'm going to live, but let's say I'm 30, and I can expect to live to be 80 at least. So that's 50 more years, and then you add on 50 years after your death, that's 100 years. And you sit around and you say, that's actually not long enough. I'm going to do something else, 50 more years for when I'm alive, and 50 more after I'm dead, that's just not a sufficient incentive. It's got to be 70 years after I'm dead. It's got to be 120 years after I'm dead.
Well, this actually, suddenly I realized that what you said a minute ago about how copyright can cure everything except global warming. On that time scale, maybe we need to talk about whether copyright can cure glable warming, because maybe in 150 years, exactly.
But if you look at it another way, look at it from the perspective of a publisher, right? So the argument is, no, that's, you're making a silly case. The real case is this, that in 2012, a publisher is going to give you more money, right, for that work based upon it lasting 70 years after you're dead rather than 50. Because you don't know when you're going to die, but publishers allegedly will live forever. So right now, the present value is going to be more because we're going to give you more. But that's not true either. If you talk to publishers, no publisher is going to give you more money today based upon allegedly 20 more years, 100 years, because we're talking about the difference between a 100-year copyright and a 120-year copyright. And most works don't have any market. And if they have a market, it's not more than a year or 2 years or 3 years. In my case, a few weeks.
Buy it now. Buy it now.
Give me more. Buy it now, right?
So, but this brings me back to the sort of first two ailments you mentioned of copyright, namely what you view as a somewhat unrealistic rhetoric, and the fact that policymakers seem to accept it. And I'm curious, one of the main themes in your book that you really decry is this notion, which really is, often, you hear it often at the heart of debates about copyright, this notion that copyright law is necessary to create an incentive for creativity. I mean, that really is a central story that copyright supporters tell. And you really take that notion to task. What's your sense of why that's actually overselling what copyright can actually deliver?
Right. So if I could go back to your sports metaphor about, liking a sports team, whether it's the 49ers, and I grew up in Marin, so even though I live in Connecticut, I'm still a 49ers fan. You know, when you interview